I don't know if anybody is here yet hanging out. If you are, say hello. That would be cool. It's really hot today, but I've turned off the fan, so we'll see how long that lasts. I may have to turn on the fan and then fiddle around with the mic to figure out if you guys can even hear me, whatever. But we're gonna try it without the fan and see what happens. I've got a glass of ice cold lemonade next to me, so at least there's something that's cold, that's accessible. Um, I'm gonna go back to. I think I'm just gonna jump into this because I don't see anybody chatting. So hello to the VOD. Um, I wanted to go back to last week because I did a little bit of research and I was trying to figure out exactly what's going on with the two introductions that seem to be in this book. Um, they're basically, as far as I can tell, they're completely fiction. So his wife isn't named Helen. She's not a child psychologist. They don't have a son named Jason. Well, he doesn't have a son named Jason. In the story, as part of the fiction, he created this whole framing thing, but like with himself as the main character. Um, so that's kind of cool, but also really confusing. But I can understand why he wouldn't want to like bring his actual family into the story, because that's like private and personal. But it means that you have no idea like how much of it is true and how much of it is not, which I think is cool from a public figure perspective. You don't really want people to know a lot of like your personal details. Um, but it's definitely unique, I think. I don't know of any other book that does that has like that sort of, this is the author, but a fictional version of the author, but um yeah, I don't know. I think it's cool. Um because it doesn't seem like it's something that anybody's ever done before. But anyway, I'm just gonna get right into it. And if you want to say hello in the chat because I've got it right in front of me and I can see it. And um, I could also probably see it over there. And I've got OBS on that side today, so I don't know where to look. I'm just gonna look at the book and read it. um, all right, Chapter 1, The Bride. There's another callback because when he's reminiscing in the introduction, he's talking about how his father always used to start that story with Chapter 1, The Bride. Um, and so I like that he actually stuck to it and called it that, even if maybe in the copy of the book that he got, it didn't say that. I like that he, even if it didn't say that, he changed it so that it would match what his father had told him. So I think that's cool, kind of like a generational following through in the generations. Chapter 1, The Bride. The year that Buttercup was born, the most beautiful woman in the world was a French scullery maid named Annette. Annette worked in Paris for the Duke and Duchess de Guiche. Hopefully I said that right. And it did not escape the Duke's notice that someone extraordinary was polishing the pewter. The Duke's notice did not escape the notice of the Duchess either, who was not very beautiful and not very rich, but plenty smart. The Duchess set about studying Annette, and shortly found her adversary's tragic flaw: chocolate. Armed now, the Duchess set to work. The Palace de Guiche turned into a candy castle. Everywhere you looked, bonbons. There were piles of chocolate-covered mints in the drawing rooms, baskets of chocolate-covered nougats in the parlor. Annette never had a chance. Inside a season, she went from delicate to whopping, and the Duke never glanced in her direction without sad bewilderment clouding his eyes. Annette, it might be noted, seemed only cheerier throughout her enlargement. She eventually married the pastry chef, and they both ate a lot until old age claimed them. Things, it might also be noted, did not fare so cheerily for the Duchess. The Duke, for reasons passing understanding, next became smitten with his very own mother-in-law, which caused the Duchess ulcers, only they didn't have ulcers yet. More precisely, ulcers existed, people had them, but they weren't called ulcers. The medical profession at that time called them stomach pains, and felt the best care was coffee, dolloped with brandy twice a day until the pains subsided. The Duchess took her mixture faithfully, watching through the years as her husband and her mother blew kisses at each other behind her back. Not surprisingly, the Duchess's grumpiness became legendary, as Voltaire has so ably chronicled, except this was before Voltaire. The year Buttercup turned 10, the most beautiful woman lived in Bengal, the daughter of a successful tea merchant. This girl's name was Eleuthera, and her skin was of a dusky perfection unseen in India for 80 years. There have only been 11 perfect complexions in all of India since accurate accounting began. Eleuthera was 19 the year the pox plague hit Bengal. The girl survived, even if her skin did not. When Buttercup was 15, Adela Terrell, of Sussex on the Thames, was easily the most beautiful creature. Adela was 20, and so far did she outdistance the world that it seemed certain she would be the most beautiful for many, many years. But then one day, one of her suitors, she had 104 of them, exclaimed that without question Adela must be the most ideal item yet spawned. Adela, flattered, began to ponder on the truth of the statement. That night, alone in her room, she examined herself pore by pore in her mirror. This was after mirrors. I like that. It took her until close to dawn to finish her inspection, but by that time it was clear to her that the young man had been quite correct in his assessment. She was, through no real faults of her own, perfect. As she strolled through the family rose gardens watching the sunrise, she felt happier than she had ever been. Not only am I perfect, she said to herself, I am probably the first perfect person in the whole long history of the universe. Not a part of me could stand improving. How lucky I am to be perfect and rich and sought after and sensitive and young. Young. The mist was rising around her as Adela began to think. Well, of course I'll always be sensitive, she thought, and I'll always be rich. But I don't quite see how I'm going to manage to always be young. And when I'm not young, how am I going to stay perfect? And if I'm not perfect, well, what else is there? What indeed? Adela furrowed her brow in desperate thought. It was the first time in her life her brow had ever had to furrow, and Adela gasped when she realized what she had done, horrified that she had somehow damaged it, perhaps permanently. She rushed back to her mirror and spent the morning, She rushed back to her mirror and spent the morning, and although she managed to convince herself that she was still quite as perfect as ever, there was no question that she was not quite as happy as she had been. She had begun to fret. The first worry lines appeared within a fortnight, the first wrinkles within a month, and before the year was out, creases abounded. She married soon thereafter the selfsame man who accused her of sublimity. Sublimity. I said it right. Okay. She married soon thereafter the selfsame man who accused her of sublimity and gave him merry hell for many years. Buttercup, of course, at 15 knew none of this, and if she had, would have found it totally unfathomable. How could someone care if she were the most beautiful woman in the world or not? What difference could it have made if you were only the third most beautiful, or the sixth? Buttercup at this time was nowhere near that high, being barely in the top 20, and that primarily on potential, certainly not on any particular care she took of herself. She hated to wash her face. She loathed the area behind her ears. She was sick of combing her hair and did so as little as possible. What she liked to do, preferred above all else really, was to ride her horse and taunt the farm boy. The horse's name was Horse. Buttercup was never long on imagination, and it came when she called it, went where she steered it, and did what she told it. The farm boy did what she told him too. Actually, he was more a young man now, but he had been a farm boy when Orphaned, he had come to work for her father, and Buttercup referred to him that way still. "Farm boy, fetch me this." "Get me that, farm boy." "Quickly, lazy thing, trot now, or I'll tell father." "As you wish." That was all he ever answered. "As you wish." "Fetch that, farm boy." "As you wish." "Dry this, farm boy." "As you wish." He lived in a hovel out near the animals, and, according to Buttercup's mother, he kept it clean. He even read when he had candles. "I'll leave the lad an acre in my will," Buttercup's father was fond of saying. They had acres then. "You'll spoil him," Buttercup's mother always answered. "He's slaved for many years. Hard work should be rewarded." Then, rather than continue the argument, they had arguments then, too, they would both turn on their daughter. "You didn't bathe," her father said. I did," from Buttercup. "Not with water," her father continued. "You reek like a stallion." "I've been riding all day," Buttercup explained. "You must bathe, Buttercup," her mother joined in. "The boys don't like their girls to smell of stables." "Oh, the boys!" Buttercup fairly exploded. "I do not care about the boys. Horse loves me, and that is quite sufficient, thank you." She said that speech aloud, and she said it often. But, like it or not, things were beginning to happen. Shortly before her 16th birthday, Buttercup realized that it had now been more than a month since any girl in the village had spoken to her. She had never much been close to girls, so the change was nothing sharp, but at least before there were head nods exchanged when she rode through the village or along the cart tracks. But now, for no reason, there was nothing. A quick glance away as she approached, that was all. Buttercup cornered Cornelia one morning at the blacksmith's and asked about the silence. "I should think, after what you've done, you'd have the courtesy not to pretend to ask," came from Cornelia. "And what have I done?" What? You've stolen them." With that, Cornelia fled, but Buttercup understood. She knew who them was. The boys. The village boys. The beef-witted, feather-brained, rattle-skulled, clod-pated, dim-domed, noggle-noggined, sap-headed, lunk-knobbed boys. How could anybody accuse her of stealing them? Why would anybody want them, anyway? What good were they? All they did was pester and vex and annoy. "Can I brush your horse, Buttercup?" "Thank you, but the farm boy does that." "Can I go riding with you, Buttercup?" "Thank you, but I really do enjoy myself alone." "You think you're too good for anybody, don't you, Buttercup?" No, I don't. I just like riding by myself, that's all." But throughout her 16th year, even this kind of talk gave way to stammering and flushing, and, at the very best, questions about the weather. "Do you think it's going to rain, Buttercup?" "I don't think so. The sky is blue." "Well, it might rain." "Yes, I suppose it might." "You think you're too good for anybody, don't you, Buttercup?" "No, I just don't think it's going to rain, that's all." At night, more often than not, they would congregate in the dark beyond her window and laugh about her. She ignored them. Usually the laughter would give way to insult. She paid them no mind. If they grew too damaging, the farm boy handled things, emerging silently from his hovel, thrashing a few of them, sending them flying. She never failed to thank him when he did this. "As you wish," was all he ever answered. When she was almost 17, a man in a carriage came to town and watched as she rode for provisions. He was still there on her return, peering out. She paid him no mind, and, indeed, by himself he was not important. But he marked a turning point. Other men had gone out of their way to catch sight of her. Other men had even ridden 20 miles for the privilege, as this man had. The importance here is that this was the first rich man who had bothered to do so, the first noble. And it was this man, whose name is lost to antiquity, who mentioned Buttercup to the Count. Pause while I rehydrate. The land of Florin was set between where Sweden and Germany would eventually settle. This was before Europe. I just really love all of the parentheses where he's placing it in time. He's like, it was after the invention of mirrors, it was before Europe, it was after this and before this. I really like that. I don't know if it would work in every book, but I like the way that he's got that as a running thing through there. Anyway, this was before Europe. In theory, it was ruled by King Lotharon and his wife and his second wife, the Queen. No name. Don't bother to name the women. In theory, it was ruled by King Lotharon and his second wife, the Queen. But in fact, the king was barely hanging on, could only rarely tell day from night, and basically spent his time in muttering. He was very old, every organ in his body had long since betrayed him, and most of his important decisions regarding Florin had a certain arbitrary quality that bothered many of the leading citizens. Prince Humperdinck actually ran things. If there had been a Europe, he would have been the most powerful man in it. Even as it was, nobody within 1,000 miles wanted to mess with him. The Count was Prince Humperdinck's only confidant. His last name was Rugen, but no one needed to use it. He was the only count in the country, the title having been bestowed by the prince as a birthday present some years before, the happening taking place naturally at one of the countess's parties. The countess was considerably younger than her husband. All of her clothes came from Paris. This was after Paris. And she had superb taste. This was after taste, too, but only just. And since it was such a new thing, and since the countess was the only lady in all Florin to possess it, is it any wonder she was the leading hostess of the land? Eventually, her passion for fabric and face paint caused her to settle permanently in Paris, where she ran the only salon of international consequence. For now, she busied herself with simply sleeping on silk, eating on gold, and being the single most feared and admired woman in Florinese history. If she had figure faults, her clothes concealed them. If her face was less than divine, it was hard to tell once she had got done applying substances. This was before glamour, but if it hadn't been for ladies like the Countess, there would never have been a need for its invention. In sum, the Rugens were couple of the week in Florin, and had been for many years. Okay, so there's an abridgment inside the story, which I think Ciro is the one that recommended the book, and I think they said that that's how it would happen, but I didn't realize it would be like part of the text. I thought it would be like at the bottom of the page, but no, it's just within, so I'm just going to keep reading through it. This is me. All abridging remarks and other comments will be in this fancy italic type, so you'll know. When I said at the start that I'd never read this book, that's true. My father read it to me, and I just quick-skimmed along, crossing out whole sections when I did the abridging, leaving everything just as it was in the original Morgenstern. This chapter is totally intact. My intrusion here is because of the way Morgenstern uses parentheses. The copy editor at Harcourt kept filling the margins of the galley proofs with questions. How can it be before Europe but after Paris? And how is it possible this happens before glamour, when glamour is an ancient concept? See glamour in the Oxford English Dictionary. And eventually, am I going crazy? What am I to make of these parentheses? When does this book take place? I don't understand anything. Help! Denise, the copy editor, has done all my books since Boys and Girls Together, and she had never been as emotional in the margins with me before. I couldn't help her. Either Morgenstern meant them seriously or he didn't. Maybe he meant some of them seriously and some others he didn't, but he never said which were the serious ones. Or maybe it was just the author's way of telling the reader stylistically that this isn't real, it never happened. That's what I think, in spite of the fact that if you read back into Florinese history, it did happen. The facts, anyway. No one can say about the actual motivations. All I can suggest to you is, if the parentheses bug you, don't read them. After I just got done saying that I was enjoying the parentheses, because I wasn't really thinking about it entirely chronologically. I was thinking about it from an author's perspective of the author knows when this happened and is trying to convey that. And it anchors it in a place and time. But as a reader, I feel like I don't need to try and figure that out. I'm just going to go with it. It gives it the feeling that somebody knows what's happening, and it's okay if I'm not fully like placing it on a timeline. So I like the parentheses because I feel like it does give it validity, even if from a logical perspective, there's no timeline where it would fit. But that's me. I'm going to read them. Hi there. Thanks for joining our book club. If you'd like to join the conversation, I would love it if you would leave us a comment. And if you'd like to see more, check out the playlist.